2014, he published his latest book on Handbook on the Entrepreneurial University with Elgar Publishing. Then it's a pleasure to stay with you here, and you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Today is something where I had some difficulty in preparing because, of course, we're talking about the Entrepreneurial University here, and we have many experts in the Entrepreneurial University. So the question is, what can we speak about? So I decided to think about this talk in two different ways. Since we're talking about university and industry networks here and the idea of economic growth, one of the ideas that is important, I believe, for most of you is how do you foster the high-impact type of entrepreneurs that we're looking for that make big changes in terms of economic growth, in terms of developing more customers, more jobs, and then also looking at the Entrepreneurial University for your context, because here we're talking about in a European context, we have different development. The Commission calls it the progression model of where you are in the development. But let's focus on this area of high-impact entrepreneurs. So high-impact entrepreneurs are, first of all, we have the general population, where we have entrepreneurs here as being a small sector, a small section of the total population. And then if we split that down, we have low-growth entrepreneurs being the majority, sustainable businesses, small mom-and-pop shops. We also have this idea of moderate growth and then high growth. So then if we take this high growth and moderate growth and we expand it more in terms of the jobs that they create, you can see that this small number of high-growth entrepreneurs create a large amount of jobs. So they're important in terms of how we develop in entrepreneurship. And there are certain characteristics that we can talk about of these people, according to a recent OECD study. And this is that they tend to be younger. After college, they tend to be college educated, many holding graduate degrees. The majorities are also partnering, which is important. Where you would meet partners, we're going to talk about the importance of a network here in just a little while, and I've seen a lot of good practices here during the day looking at these aspects of partnerships. And also that there's a perceived of opportunity. In fact, when I was creating this, I was thinking about also questioning this paradigm of opportunity versus necessity. But that's one of these aspects that most of us understand through the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor and other studies. And the idea here is also that they're looking for funding, these typical high-growth entrepreneurs. So many of them have previous experience as well. One of the hardest things in terms of measuring the outcomes of entrepreneurship education and intervention is you have the act of the educational initiative. That can be a business plan competition or an entrepreneurship course or some sort of other aspect of developing entrepreneurial attitudes and skill sets. And then you have the actual act of entrepreneurship, which comes later. So one of the things that's very difficult to measure entrepreneurship education and other sort of outcomes. If we look at, they have experience as an employee in a high-growth firm. These are various studies looking at high-growth entrepreneurs. High levels of experience in industry, and they also tend to be male, at least in these two studies in the United States and the UK. If we talk a little bit about where they are in terms of why they started. So always the two reasons that are the top two reasons why people become entrepreneurs. Does anyone know? First one? To make more money. That's the number one. If you look at surveys across countries, the number one reasons why people become entrepreneurs is to make more money. The second reason is to be your own boss, typically speaking. One thing I wanted to highlight here, though, and this is the difference between high growth and other types of entrepreneurs. We have high growth and moderate growth entrepreneurs. As you can see, they're really focusing on partners. I know in my organization, not be able to do the things that I do without having the partners that I have. And they also here look at the idea of actively being a part of the investment community. If we talk about their education levels, obviously high-growth entrepreneurs have more education, a university degree or a postgraduate study, and again are in this young age group, having had some experience and then starting a company. So I want to transition here to tell you about a model that probably most of you have not heard of. Has anyone heard of Endeavor.org? Okay, good. Endeavor is one of these models that is, it's an NGO. It is to develop in developing countries economic growth. And the typical paradigm was giving lots of money to government or NGOs that go there and help buy things or have programs, things like that, do training. This NGO is different. They invest in high-growth entrepreneurs, so in a network of high-growth entrepreneurs. So what does Endeavor do? Well, they work in over 20 countries. They have affiliate offices here. They're just launching here in Spain. So those of you who are from Spain might be interested in learning more about what they do. They have supported almost 1,000 high-growth entrepreneurs, 600 companies. And the idea here is that these high-growth entrepreneurs are important for development because you have many millions in revenues, increases in jobs, and by investing in these high-growth entrepreneurs, you have a multiplier effect of being able to have more jobs, have more growth. And then the idea is those entrepreneurs who are high growth in the different countries then give back to the NGO and try to continue the cycle. What they do is they have partnerships with some big brand companies. These companies help not only the NGO itself, but sometimes also their entrepreneurs. We also have this idea, the most important aspect of this is the network. So what do I mean by this? I went to one of their international selection committees. The way it works is they get selected nationally, then they go to an international selection committee, and then they become Endeavor entrepreneurs. This means they enter into the network. So at one of their selection panels, the international selection panels in Miami, I was there and saw a Turkish entrepreneur who was doing customized shoes for women in the Middle East. Now the idea was he and his partners were growing their firm at quite a rate, but even Turkey, which is a large producer of manufactured goods and shoe industry, they didn't have enough capacity. They would have to move to China eventually. But the fact of the matter is that Turkish entrepreneur never had any idea about how to move to offshore in China. So they do this through this network where you can find other entrepreneurs that also have done these sorts of things. Then they have a connection with an investors network and inspiration through working with different areas. So here's some of the countries that they work in. It started predominantly in South America. The model is going to be majorly adapted in Africa. And they're coming here now to Europe, to maybe crisis Europe. And Poland, we should say, because Poland's done quite well. But you can see already in Turkey, in Greece, and they're already also in Morocco. So developing quite quickly this model. And what they point to in one of their major studies is they started out in Argentina. And this is a mapping of the IT companies in Argentina. And the connections are various ones. You can't read this, but there's mentorship, there's inspiration, there's former employees. The idea here is when we talk about an ecosystem, this is what we're talking about. If you would map an ecosystem, this is, in the high-tech sector, the sort of interrelations there are between different companies and different entrepreneurs. So if you take away this networking effect, then you come up to something like this. Okay? And this is what the importance of not only, say, Endeavor does, but maybe some of your organizations as well. So if you haven't been able to put this onto your own sort of mapping to try to justify also your work, if you can think about this being your local community and what sort of connections you've been able to make in your region, in your country, this sort of aspect is something that I think can justify a lot of the type of investments needed for the centers and the other institutions that you work for. So this idea of mapping these interconnections being of extreme importance. The other aspect we talk about in terms of the entrepreneurial university, not just connecting people, but also the idea of innovation and creation and this idea of a generation of economic growth. We talk, and we had the keynote speaker last year speaking about the entrepreneurial universities being sort of the natural incubator. The idea of being able to develop further through this support structure for teachers, for new ventures, for students, but really trying to connect everything here. So my first takeaway is this idea of the network, this idea that high-impact entrepreneurs are important, and the question of how do you foster that. So there's one model, which is the network aspect, the inspiration aspect, the smart capital aspect, this being part of a sort of more total package of how you might want to also think about supporting your entrepreneurs, be they high growth, be they medium growth, or even low growth entrepreneurs. If we talk about the Entrepreneurial University, and this is really preaching to the converted, right? So I don't have to tell you too much about it, but obviously the organization itself being entrepreneurial, so the structures, and this is one of the reasons why my co-author and I wrote this book. We have the Handbook on the Entrepreneurial University. This was published in March of this year. Also, being the entrepreneur that I am, it's for sale outside, and it's at the biggest discount you can find this book at. On Amazon, they are selling it for 12%, and we're giving you 25% discount outside. So please do stop by. But the idea here, again, is the members of the university, faculty, and students turning themselves somehow to entrepreneurs and interacting of the university environment and coupling the university and regions. Like the great example we have here in Madrid of really connecting between, obviously, the university and industry network. But it's not just enough for us to talk about this, because as you can hear, I have an American accent, and I'm indeed from New York City, but I have been working and living in Portugal now for the last 13, almost 14 years now. Been doing my PhD research and my postdoc research all on these questions of how to create more and better entrepreneurs, and looking specifically at Europe, connecting that with the United States. But now I want to transition a little bit to talk about your specific context. Because it's good to talk about high-impact entrepreneurs. Okay, we can all sort of agree with the importance of that. But perhaps there's a different sort of type of high-impact entrepreneur in Portugal than, say, the Netherlands or, say, Norway. I mean, these contexts are important. So I think it's important that we look at that. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit about our platform for entrepreneurship education in Portugal that is trying to promote what we feel is needed in our country. So the first thing, of course, is you have these cultural factors, right? You have these academic norms and behaviors. You have your country culture. You also have what people think about entrepreneurs. And maybe, I can just take a little venture here and play a little bit with this idea of culture. Being from the United States, we have this iconic idea of the lemonade stand. So maybe I can just have a show of hands. How many of you had a small business or a lemonade stand, or I don't know, maybe you sold bracelets or some shells on the beach or something like that? Can I have just a raise of hands here? Okay, good. Anyone have specifically a lemonade stand? Oh, yes? Okay, excellent. Our Portuguese colleague. Sometimes I joke in Portugal, it would be maybe a port wine stand or something like that, but I'm glad to see it was a lemonade stand, much more healthy perhaps. And so the idea here is, again, how can we get mom and dad to sort of back the business? Of course, I'm being a little joking here, but grandma, also her great lemonade recipe. What kind of stand, marketing here is important. Best place to set up. I had my lemonade stand in front of our building in New York City, which had the great fortune of having 20 stories with lots of people who knew me and my parents, so they felt more obligated to buy lemonade. And generally we do it for a goal right? There's nothing wrong with having kids to sell, and it's really learning that aspect, selling. When in the European view, maybe it's slightly different. At least some part of the Portuguese dream, and this is something that I have also been working on in our country context. Part of the context in Portugal is kids shouldn't have to work during the summer. They should be able to go to the beach. We have lovely beaches. I invite you to come over to our country. But the idea of the middle class, upper middle class, is the kids should spend all their summers at the beach, not working until they're like 23, 24 years old. And I'm not sure that's the right paradigm. So the first question is, is mom and dad, are they actually allowed to back a business? Do I have the IP? And actually this is I'm not joking here, I'm involved in an IP, an intellectual property education experts panel for the European Commission. I was in Brussels last week talking about some of these aspects. Also talking about EU regulations, selling, street compliance, a permit from the city. And of course, if you don't collect VAT, you go to jail, right? At least that's the thought. And the question here is, why can't kids sell? But I bring this to a point to talk about culture. And culture is important. Okay? So one thing that I can tell you is that the word entrepreneur, the concept, did not happen in the United States overnight. This happened as a transition. So in any event, we have now, of course, we talked about this a little bit the last speaker, in the information age in the 1990s. And the question now in the 2000s and 2010s is this knowledge economy, et cetera. So, but we didn't see this term entrepreneur until about the 1980s. And the median year, that is the year in which most entrepreneurship courses started in the United States, was 1986. Whereas if I compare that with, say, the context in Portugal, where I've done studies, but also in Europe in general, that happens much later. In Portugal, it happened in 1998, was the medium year, 2000. And you can see that this happens later. So, but there is obviously this catching up. But let me show you another fact of transition in terms of culture. I use this in terms, again, of Portugal. This idea of how many times did the word empreendedorismo, which is also very difficult to say, it came in the Portuguese press. Okay? So if we look at the baseline of 2003, it happened that it was just mentioned 520 times. That's it. The word empreendedorismo. But you can see that through time, this progresses. And what I use this for is to explain that we are in a transition. You talk about the Schumpeterian idea of creative destruction. Schumpeter discussed creative destruction at the societal, at the larger level, at the economic level, and this is what's happening in Europe. It's this fact of the entrepreneurial economy being upon us. And so we can see that this sort of transition is happening, and I imagine that if you did a research in your country for the word entrepreneur in your local language, you would find some sort of progression mirroring this. Maybe it would be a few years earlier, maybe it would be a few larger numbers, but you'd see some sort of trend like this. Entrepreneurship is also important for foreign direct investment. One of the ideas here of the previous speaker was that this open source revolution needs to happen because this is important. I know this is hard to read, but this is, in Portugal, the entrepreneurial culture being the least desirable aspect and the one that needs to be changed the most. But of course, we can't organize the entrepreneurship, the Entrepreneurial University, if we don't understand how to structure the resources. No matter how many resources you have, if you don't organize it well, then you won't be able to achieve your goal. So, this is our organization. I'm going to explain to you a little bit about how we came to this and the context in which we work. So I was very sorry not to join you last night at dinner, but it was for good reason. I was closing a 2.6 million euro proposal for the European Commission on policy experimentation in entrepreneurship education. And this is the idea of developing public policy in this area. This is at the school level. So the more that you get involved, and I don't know how many years you've been involved in this entrepreneurial aspect at your university, But the more you get involved, the more you will find that you need to plant the seeds of entrepreneurship earlier. So this is one of the findings that in my PhD research, and that we continue to find. So we move also to the idea of entrepreneurship education across all educational levels. So the first aspect in which we work on is public policy. If we were in the United States, maybe this would be different, but in the European and the Portuguese context, this is very important. It has to go with the government. So we work in parallel with government partners in developing strategies. All of our projects now have policy briefs where we try to talk about what we're doing in terms of policy. We look at developing evidence-based research and impact. There are two things that I'm going to mention in this regard. The policy experimentation is very much about impact. It uses random control trials to show the effects of entrepreneurship education. We have, this is experiential entrepreneurship education. So for example, creating a company would be an experiential, a mini company at a school would be an experiential learning process. We have, now since it's closed I can tell you, we have the entrepreneurial challenge methodology where we're going to have 14 different challenges that students can use. It's going to be very versatile. It's going to be in different aspects of the program. We're very confident about our proposal. And the idea here is that we use impact assessment and we use a random control trial in doing so. Capacity building and experimentation. When we talk about capacity building, I'm mainly talking about teacher training. And I'm also going to give you a reference. In fact, one of the sponsors of this event is a teacher training course for higher education professors and for university staff that support entrepreneurship. So capacity building and experimentation. When we talk about experimentation, we have this large policy experimentation, but we also do experimentation in new areas. We look at female entrepreneurship, female immigrant entrepreneurship more specifically. We know that immigrants have higher levels of entrepreneurship, so to facilitate that is helpful. We also have a program actually talking about the use of big data. We're helping social inclusion. We're looking at NEETs. Those are not in employment, education, or training. So young people who are very vulnerable. And we're actually going to do data mining into social media. This is totally experimentational. We don't know if it'll work. But we're going to do data mining in social media to try to find out their needs. So this sort of is what I mean when I talk about experimentation. Different areas, new areas. There's lots of providers of entrepreneurship education in Portugal. There are lots of organizations at universities. We differentiate through doing these three things. If we do not, if the projects that come our way do not fall into one of these three categories, we do not touch it. But fortunately, things have been going well, and we have several things that are working in this regard. This is ASTI. I have 7 or 8 copies of this. Is the most recent European project looking at outcomes of entrepreneurship education. This is open use, obviously being a European project. Open use, astiproject.eu is the site. You can see it right here, astiproject.eu. And it's in, I think it's in 8 different languages that we have. And this is a little guide on how we've come up with the questionnaire that we've used, the outcomes. It's been tested on over 2,000 students. And this is at all levels, university level, primary school, and secondary school. So we look to use this, and in doing so, we partnered with the Ministry of Education, with the Ministry of Economy, with the Ministry of Social Solidarity. We partner with all of these different parts of the Portuguese government so that we can embed this sort of impact analysis. So when they do training courses for entrepreneurship, that everyone will use the same sort of tool so that in a public policy perspective, we can measure it and we can monitor it and we can do something about it. The other thing that we've used, and I know this was spoken about yesterday with Julieta, we're going to use this in Portugal. On the 18th of November, we will launch this with the OECD. It will be the 1-year anniversary of this tool. I also was involved in developing this with the OECD. So using these 7 different metrics of the Entrepreneurial University and using this in the group, the groups, the user groups that you can have. So we're trying to do this with Portuguese universities. This is the program that also is a co-sponsor of this event. This is Kinect. Kinect is an initiative to, again, teach higher education professors and staff of universities about teaching entrepreneurship at the higher education level. It's got lots of experts that are involved. It's all across Europe. Well, we have the next one coming up is in Tel Aviv in March. But then I certainly invite you to come join us. It's going to be an awesome event that we're going to have in Lisbon in the end of July in 2015. So we will be motivating not only the Portuguese higher education professionals, but also all across Europe. It's very cheap if you get the early bird special. I think it's something like 750, 800 euros. It includes all of your meals and things like that. So you're going to have a great time. Lisbon is an awesome city, and I invite you to come join us in that. The other thing that we're trying to do is we've been lobbying to have an assessment of higher education institutions dealing with entrepreneurship in Portugal, using the OECD, and in this way trying to better the game across the national level by assessing what is going on. So we have almost closed this to be in Portugal. Rumor has it, you didn't hear it from me, but they're going to do it in other countries as well, so keep your eyes open. The other thing that this will coincide with is a 10-year anniversary of my PhD study in this area, so I will have a great longitudinal perspective, so I can show you how many new courses, what sort of methodologies, how many students are being involved, and what student attitudes are towards entrepreneurship in a 10-year period in Portugal. We use these areas to develop strategically HEIs. My desire is, and I've been trying to talk with Polytechnic university coordinators, with the university, with the KRUPS, the university rectors organization, to try to capacity build on these different levels. You can have seminars in these different areas. And the idea that I'm trying to promote in Portugal is this co-opetition, this idea of, obviously we have competition, but we also have cooperation, right? So co-opetition, the idea of cooperating and competing to develop the whole system better. I mentioned already the book that tries to advance this area a bit more. Lots of interesting different articles and chapters that you can read about. Again, on sale outside for the best discount that you'll ever find on this book. I'll end just by leaving up this slide to again emphasize the idea of having a strategy. You know, Portuguese government tried to put together an entrepreneurship strategy which turned out to be a laundry list. They tried to get everything that was ever happening in the country into a list. And I greatly respect that effort, and I think that's a very good first start. A strategy is doing 3 to 4 things. If you cannot try to articulate what you do in 3 to 4 things, talking about those priorities, then that's not a strategy. So at the heart of the Entrepreneurial University, and the heart of being an entrepreneurial university in your context, working with high-impact entrepreneurs or not, is having a strategy. So I'm open to any sort of questions you might have, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, we have some minutes for questions. Then, any question here?
Yes. Yes, please.
Yes.
Just talking about the smart capital you mentioned before, please you could tell us a little bit more about the mentor capital program?
I'm sorry, the mentor, sure. So mentoring and coaching is one of these models that are very important in promoting entrepreneurship at all levels. The mentor model of having, specifically in dealing with Endeavor, they have boards. So here in Spain, I believe it's Santander also that's one of the sponsors. But the CEOs of large companies and large entrepreneurs, they put towards, I think it's 75,000 euros a year. And that is a personal contribution that they make towards developing this. And the other thing that they do is they also promise that they'll give their time to these emerging entrepreneurs. And this is what, if you can match, and there's a lot of goodwill with entrepreneurs, existing entrepreneurs, for young entrepreneurs. So if we can try to match and take existing and successful entrepreneurs and match them with inspiring entrepreneurs, then you have a real value added. And you know, I think as our careers progress, we start thinking about our legacy. And I think for many entrepreneurs, once you achieve that very large sum or not so many large sum or a certain head count in your company, the next thing you're really left with is, what is my legacy going to be left?
Yeah. Yes. Another one there.
Do you, in your work on entrepreneurship, distinguish between entrepreneurship and self-employment?
Well, in the data, it's very hard to do so. Because as we know, GEM data uses this idea of self-employment as being a proxy for entrepreneurs. It's very hard. You know, I did my postdoc research in the area of happiness. It's a subjective measure, excuse me. I'm not sure, I mean, if you look at entrepreneurship in its largest way of looking at it, it is also somewhat a subjective measure, because we talk also about intrapreneurship. We did a report on intrapreneurship. You can have entrepreneurs within policy. So there's lots of ways in which it's hard to categorize who is an entrepreneur and who is not an entrepreneur. In terms of high-impact entrepreneurs, that's quantifiable because you talk about how many jobs and revenue.
Thank you very much, Dana. That was an excellent presentation. Both speakers this morning have been fantastic. I was really interested in that map, the visual map, and looking at the high-impact entrepreneurs over, I guess it's been the last 14 years, 1997 to 2014. 17 years, and that how there's an investment now in several small high-impact entrepreneurs, and if you look back to the 1997 entrepreneurs, those companies are now very big. So I'm kind of interested in picking winners. Obviously, there were probably the same number of small ones back in 1997, and yet only a few of those chosen for the Endeavor program were successful. And have you recognized any patterns, or can you not pick winners and you're looking at really investing, or has your research shown that you need to invest in a whole bunch of potentials because just so many of variables over time? Just your comment.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the model in Endeavor, and I think this relates to the question here in the front, the question of mentorship, you know, the idea of successful high-impact entrepreneurs being able to identify others. So that's one way in which they do selection. Obviously, it can be a numbers game. What they did, and there are some that obviously failed. That's part of it, and that was another topic that I thought I might be able to speak about today, because also being a very important aspect in what we do. But there is no magic formula. I think the best thing that can be said is to connect with others that have done it, because that mentor aspect is important, and maybe they also can identify those people.